Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Kelsey and Grant, are you ready? I'll go ahead and introduce you.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, wonderful. Well, first of all, good morning, everyone. My name is Taryn Miley. I'm the Elementary Curriculum Director for Springfield Local Schools and a proud partner of Project Impact through Bowling Green State University. We are delighted that you are joining us on this Saturday morning. I want to just point you to the chat box. If you need anything specific during the session, please send a direct chat to me, Taryn Miley. If you have questions or feedback for presenters, you can post them in the chat and I will share them at a convenient time. I am very, very proud to introduce the presenters today. They are from my district, Springfield Local Schools. We have Grant Hepfer-Gaver, who is an elementary school counselor at Holland Elementary, and I work very closely with Grant in a variety of capacities. And we also have Kelsey DePompe from Springfield Local Schools as well, and she is a high school counselor. And we are, again, just very proud to have them joining us today to tell us more about supporting students with a trauma-informed lens. And I want to just, again, remind you to use the chat box, and I will watch that and moderate the time for us so that we stay on target. And at the end, I'll explain how to transition to the next session. All right. We are so proud of our two presenters and ready to go.
All right. Thank you for that introduction, Taryn. Yes, I am Grant Hepfer-Gaver, and Kelsey, do you want to say? I'm sorry, and this is Kelsey. So a little before we start presenting, we wanted to put a warning at the beginning of this that we will be talking about a sensitive subject about trauma and traumatic events. So if at any point you are feeling just out of sorts throughout the presentation, you are more than welcome to mute, walk away for a minute. If you truly feel like you have to leave, that is perfectly okay. We will not be upset. So kind of the coming together of this presentation was me and Kelsey both kind of realized together we have a deep passion for better understanding, trauma and what our students are going through, especially as counselors. We definitely see the effects of trauma every day on students, either like directly or indirectly. So this presentation is a culmination of all our interests and research over the last few years. So without further ado, let's begin. You ready, Kelsey?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right. So like Taryn said, I am Grant Hepfer-Gaver. I will use he, him, his pronouns. And this is my 4th year at Holland Elementary as a school counselor. I am also certified in restorative practices and trauma intervention. And Kelsey, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Kelsey DePompe. I prefer the she, her, hers pronouns. So this is my 11th year in education. I started out as a 7-12 language arts teacher, and I'm currently in my 7th year as a school counselor, and I'm working for Springfield High School. I've also been a volunteer for several different organizations, and I've been working with the Lucas County Suicide Prevention Coalition for 4 years and just became a board member last year. One of the things I'm certified in, which I didn't even think to put in there, is bullying prevention and intervention.
Awesome. So before we begin, I want us to get more comfortable. So this is a perfect time. Since we got 22 people, so I think that's comfortable. To unmute yourself. I want us to have a little fun for a second. Bride and Ever get in the kind of come together and do an icebreaker where we all as a group count to 10. And I told Kelsey about this and she loved the idea. If we also have so each person at a time has to say 1, 2, 3, 4, but if 2 people chime in and say the same number at the same time, we start at the very beginning. We're going to take just a couple minutes. I want to see if everybody can pull this off. Can everybody do this on a Saturday? So Kelsey, would you like to start it off?
Okay, let's do it. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
1, 2,
3.
Oh. No. All right. 1,
2.
Ah! All right. Ready, set, go. 1,
2,
3.
4,
5.
6,
7.
8.
Ah. All right, one more time. One more time. 1.
2.
3.
4.
5.
6.
7.
8.
9. Oh,
You got so close.
Well, we almost made it. That's good. But, I love doing icebreakers. I think it's an easy way, and, you can take that back to wherever, your classrooms, your groups, to just kind of do a quick community get together. So our norms today, because we're going to be touching on some sensitive subjects, I want to make sure that we are respectful to each other's opinions, that we challenge our own personal assumptions, that we allow ourselves to be vulnerable today, and to kind of just sit with the information today, and that we're working together as a team across many different school districts. Does anybody have any questions or concerns about our norms before we move forward? Okay. So who's in the crowd today? So Kelsey is going to put a link in the chat box of we kind of want to get to know who is in this group today. And if you are still a student at BGSU or wherever you are, just put in where you are hoping to go as a teacher, as a counselor, as whatever your future holds. Just that's what you put in.
And I am adding that link into the chat box right now.
Okay.
Oops, it says it was only to one person. Hold on, I got to try again.
Just to me, Kelsey.
There we go. But to the other question, yes, I actually have this downloaded as a PDF, and I will make sure to share this presentation with all of you at the end through the chat box and a link through Google Drive.
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. All right. So as of now, we got 12 teachers, 3 counselors, and 2 other school personnel, 1 administrator. All right. And then
Really exciting to see this many teachers.
yes, definitely. And then there we go. All right, we got
Great mix of age levels so far.
definitely. So we got 5. We got 5 elementary school, 5 middle school, 5. Wow, pretty even across the board, and 2 other. So, oh, there we go. There's the elementary school rocking it now. So welcome everybody. So that gives us an idea of kind of where to target, but luckily, it seemed pretty across the board, which is fairly nice to see. So let me get back in here. So our next link is, we want to know, what do you know about trauma at this moment? So Kelsey, if you can put that link in there.
On it. Okay, new link sent.
Hold on, bear with me. Technology booted me from Mentimeter.
We knew there was a possibility it was going to happen.
We talked about this. There we go. All right. So, okay. So kind of a little bit. So everybody here is kind of middle of the road. You know, they know a little bit, they know enough to kind of be a support system for students. We got a few people who are very knowledgeable, which is, you know, still happy you came today, me, and two, not at all. So our hope today is that not only do you walk away today with kind of the foundation of kind of information on trauma, but also practical tools you can use in your practice or classroom. And let me jump back into this. If I was at my school, I'd have two screens, so this would be, I'd bounce around a little quicker. So come on. There we go. So our agenda for today is we have 5 things we want to talk about today. Develop an understanding of trauma, background on adverse childhood experiences, learning to shift our own perspectives on, you know, child behavior and trauma, and then classroom tools to support students, but also secondary trauma for staff, and then how to take care of that with self-care. So I'll start. So, you know, we all think of trauma as, you know, traumatic events, right? Obviously, it is a it is a subjective experience of the event, not the event itself. So, that means is that me and Kelsey can experience the same type of trauma, but we walk away with, you know, with different after effects. So I could be walking away with a lot of stress and anxiety, or, you know, other traumatic symptoms, versus Kelsey, who maybe had developed more of a natural resiliency towards traumatic events, walks away, you know, developing normal at her pace, where, you know, she might not need extra support, versus me, who might need a lot of extra support. So what are some other types? So sorry. Some traumatic events are, you know, car accidents, you know, breaking a leg, you know, rape, natural disaster. So, you know, tornado, snowstorm, fire. What are some other possible examples of traumatic events that students that we work with every day might deal with? And you can put that in the chat box, or, you know, just shout it out.
And just adding, if you're going to use an anecdotal experience, just make sure that to keep confidentiality in place, that we don't use names.
Divorce, yep, that's a good one. Bullying, constant bullying, yes. Abuse, death of a family member, death of a friend, neglect, step parents, yeah. Having a new person coming into your life, that could be traumatic for some children.
That's a good example.
Yes. Chronic illness, yeah. If you have a parent who's chronically ill, or they're chronically ill. Moving, yes. I see a lot of kids moving to different districts by moving across the street sometimes. Homelessness, you know, low self-confidence, foster situation. COVID, there it is.
Yes.
Yep, COVID, yes. I was wondering when that was coming up. Mental illness, yep. Military deployment could be another one for the child.
Even injury, I think, is one that we don't necessarily think of, especially for kids that rely on their athletics to build their self-confidence. I know that was something I personally struggled with when I fractured my ankle in high school.
Because you can't play for a while, right?
Yeah. And you have to sit and watch, and it's miserable.
Not getting along with a teacher. That's a good one. Yeah.
Yep.
I think for a lot of time, kids go in just expecting to have a teacher they constantly vibe with. And it could be disheartening to have a teacher that they just butt heads with, you know, specific subjects. Okay. So yeah, maybe they're just not vibing with like history, science, math. And so they kind of see you as kind of like the enemy sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
All good. All right. So I wanted to share this thing we call it the trauma tree. So the roots are the generational trauma. So there's, death in the family, domestic violence, assaults. Are they in a neighborhood that they see a lot of high crime? Do they see a lot of drug trafficking? There's war. So, some of our families who are refugees and who experienced war. Natural disasters. So are they, we're not only talking about a house just their house getting hit by a tornado, but maybe, or hurricane, but the whole town, the whole neighborhood. I remember, what was it, like 2 years ago, the city of Dayton got destroyed by the tornado, passing through that. It was high destructiveness. And so if these things aren't, addressed with some of our students, then, the lack of treatment, maybe it's a wrong diagnosis, wrong treatment, and that happens, right? Like, unfortunately, doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors aren't always perfect, and so, sometimes they make a wrong diagnosis compared to what really needs to be diagnosed. And if those roots are watered, then it stems into, some of the symptoms that we see. So hypervigilance, PTSD, amnesia. They might have flashbacks to the traumatic event, detachment to their family, their friends, the kids around them. They might not be able to concentrate. So you see those kids in class that are fidgeting a lot, not, maybe they're looking at a poster all the time. They're looking out the window. There may be, these kids are having panic attacks, high anxiety, depression. Now, I want to warn, now I'm saying these things now, not every kid experiencing anxiety might have a traumatic event behind them, right? But I'm just saying, these are some of the identifiers to help you figure out if maybe this student is dealing with trauma. So I think we can all agree that trauma can impact school performance, right? Like if a student is dealing with traumatic events and are affected by these traumatic events, it is going to affect their school, like what they give to the school. So they're, chances are they're not going to be doing their homework as much. They're not going to be studying that well. It's going to be hard for them to focus in class because maybe they're thinking about the traumatic event, or if it's still going on, right? Thinking about the abuse. They're thinking about not going, they're thinking about what's at home versus just getting the schoolwork done. They can experience physical, emotional distress. Long term, a lot of these, adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, leads to, physical problems, chronic disease, so cancer, diabetes, risky behaviors, alcoholism, drug use, people who deal with trauma and have a hard time coping with trauma. It makes it hard for them to stay in school. It makes it hard for them to hold a job. There is higher risk of depression, anxiety, suicide, PTSD. But as a team, we can help these kids who have been traumatized to still lead an amazing life and get through school. So just kind of showing you a side-by-side picture of brains here. So on the left side, we see a healthy brain, right? So the red, all the red is like the brain activating responses, and that's in that temporal lobe. So like decision making, interactions. And then we see, let me move this. We see on the right a lot of the darker spots. So we see, that's the brain that they did a CAT scan of someone who experienced a lot of abuse growing up. And as the brain grew, they noticed how the brain stopped firing at these positions. So this brain has not fully developed to understand emotional and cognitive situations. And so this person might run into some emotional cognitive problems along the way. All right. Kelsey?
All right, so now that we have a basic understanding of what trauma is, I want to talk a little bit about the ACEs assessment. This is a study that was done that learns a little bit about adverse childhood experiences. And as Grant had mentioned, this looks different for everybody. What might be traumatizing to one may not be as traumatizing to somebody else. And one of the things that this study has developed is that some of these responses to trauma can be genetic. So before we necessarily talk about the childhood trauma, I just want to make a point to say that 64% of adults have experienced at least, one form of adverse childhood experiences. Okay. Hey, can you go in the other room for me for just a second, please? I'll be right there. Okay, thank you. So sorry. So if you have at least one childhood trauma that you've experienced, chances are there's a second or a third one. There's an 87% increase in the possibility of that happening to you. So I think that's something that's important that we should understand in ourselves, especially in education when we're going to work with children. So these can have negative lasting effects on health and well-being. 75% of our students will experience at least one ACE before they turn 18 years old. And 1 out of every 4 students have been exposed to a traumatic event. So here's a couple examples of how ACEs works. And these are some of the categories in which it can happen. And I know we talked a little bit about this in the chat box earlier, but knowing that there's multiple forms of abuse, it's not just physical abuse, there's emotional abuse, there's sexual abuse. And then it kind of filters into neglect, where, children aren't getting their basic needs met, or they're getting emotionally ignored, essentially, where they're not getting their needs met emotionally either. Household dysfunction. I think this is something that's definitely growing, especially in terms of COVID.
Can I wipe my body?
You need to go in the other room.
I want to wipe my body.
Okay, I'll get it for you in a minute. So especially with COVID now, where we're looking at these kids that unfortunately are home alone a lot. That can create some household dysfunction in terms of stress that the parents are developing, job loss, money loss, things like that, or having constant access to seeing things that they shouldn't necessarily see in terms of maybe domestic violence with their parents, that this could have long-term effects that will affect them not only in education, but with everything they do in their lives as they develop into adults.
Before we move from the slide, I want to, as we go through this and you're looking at this, if you have worked with students, and as a student teacher capacity, think about what you've heard about maybe some of your difficult students. Where do these start lining up? If I'm looking at all these the ACE scores, like I have 2 ACE scores on here personally, right? So think about some of our students who are dealing with these, and then we start maybe seeing a correlate, a connection to some of the behaviors we see.
Something else that I think is important to mention is that when we experience these symptoms of ACEs, if they go untreated, these can become generational. So this is something that's important too for young educators or young parents or things like that. So identifying these ACEs early on and creating interventions as soon as possible, you're more likely to have positive childhood experiences, whether it's through family members, whether it's through peers, educators, and things like that. But they're going to be more open to noticing and involving themselves in these positive childhood experiences if intervention, and it's not going unnoticed, right? So I think that's something that's really important for educators, is knowing what the ACEs are and how to identify them in the moment. So some of the things that we think of that are positive childhood experiences are being able to talk openly to a family member, knowing that you feel heard, that you feel supported. And I think for a lot of us, we can probably name a couple positive family members that we have. In today's generation, this may not be the case for a lot of our youth. Having a belief that family stood by them during difficult times, again, I think probably a lot of people here today can think of something like that. I know that one of my things that affected my ACEs were being severely bullied in middle school. And that changed the chemistry in my brain and how I felt about myself. But I know that I had family that was there to support me no matter what. And that helped me come out on the other side of it. And same thing, feeling safe and protected by an adult at home. When I was going through all of that, I knew that when I went home, that was my safe place. Some non-family experiences that are positive, having friends that are supportive. So this is another reason why it's really important to be involved with your children and know who their peers are, knowing that they're going to have a positive influence on them, because it can have an effect on their brain chemistry in the long run. Having a sense of belonging and connection with a larger group who's got your back. Like I said, I know I mentioned having that injury in high school, and my volleyball team, they were my second family. They were definitely very supportive of me, but it was hard knowing that I couldn't practice, that I couldn't be involved, that it wasn't the same in celebrating. Enjoyment of participation in community traditions. I think this is a lot of where building that village comes in. And I think that we've gotten to a point in our society where it's harder to build that village, especially for people that don't necessarily live in safe neighborhoods. So I think one of the things that is important for us as educators is being a part of that village for those kids, knowing that they have a safe place when they come to school. A relationship with at least one non-parent who takes genuine interest in you. Again, teachers are on the front line of this, administrators, counselors. They spend an awful lot of time with us at school, probably more so during the week than they do with their parents, especially if they are in split households or have parents that are working. So it's not just having them come into your classroom or come into your office and reaching a surface level with them. It's taking an interest in their interest and getting to know them. That's how we help foster that positive brain development and that resiliency in these students.
So third part of our presentation today is kind of all about shifting our perspective and lens on how we kind of view some of these students, but also how do we approach them and interact with them. So really, I've been, to blame for this sometimes, but sometimes we're like, what is wrong with that student? Why are they doing this? And I always tell people, like, if they knew why, chances are they might not be doing this, or they might be able to kind of take care of it on their own. So instead of saying what is wrong with student, what has that student been through, right? That is a more effective question, right? Now you're being kind of a detective, like what have they been through? What are the challenges they've been through that's making it hard for them to learn today? Instead of why did they do that? What is going on in their life right now that is just not allowing them to be successful at school? So we got to really change that language, right? Instead of putting the blame on this kid, I always tell, don't be mad at the student, be mad at what's going on in their life, right? Like, like, where it's not our job to always investigate, but it's important that we at least kind of develop that empathy piece and be like, and look wider and take away the blame, and just in your mind be like, what do I need to do in this moment to help this student be a little bit more successful today? I always like to talk to people about, the invisible backpack, because every day students come to school with their book bag, with their textbooks, their Chromebooks, this right now with COVID, if you're in a hybrid, pencils, homework, right? But for a lot of our kids who are experiencing trauma, there's something we call the invisible book bag, which is stuff full of the beliefs about themselves, beliefs about the adults, beliefs about the world. I talk to people about, what the student's internal working model of the world, so, how do they view the world around them? Do they view the world and the adults around them as safe and trusting people? Do they go to school every day believing that the adults in this school will keep them safe versus the adults out in the real world, the adults at home? And it's part, as educators, it's part of our duty to make these students feel safe at school, make them feel they are capable of success at school, especially if they are not getting that at home in their communities. It is up to us to make these students feel that they can succeed. And with that, how can we help them repack this book bag? Because, it's not all about taking away the trauma. We can't take away that trauma. We cannot, that's not where we come into play. But how can we repack that backpack to make it more manageable so that they can kind of carry it with them and still be successful? I wanted to share this because, like I said earlier, a lot of behaviors can look similar for, a lot of kids, so I put this chart up about behavior-based meltdown and sensory-based meltdown. And so behavior-based meltdown is a lot of those kids who just, aren't getting their way, right? They're not getting called on all the time. They want to be the one that gives the answers all the time. Maybe they are just hungry. They're, they didn't sleep a lot the night before for whatever reason. They want an audience. There's a means to an end for their meltdown, right? Versus sensory-based meltdown, which is think about if we think about trauma, and we think about them thinking about the trauma. So maybe a smell made them trigger the trauma memory, maybe a color, maybe a word, a phrase, right? This is where the sensory-based meltdown comes in play, where there is no true goal for this meltdown. There is no means to an end for this meltdown. They are just not able to handle things right now. And this can take a long time to come back down versus a behavior-based meltdown, which might take 5 minutes or less, depending on, until they achieve that goal, versus a sensory-based meltdown that might take over an hour more for them to get back down to like a baseline where they can be supported. And both of these might be screaming, kicking, shouting, stomping, cussing you out, biting, throwing, hitting, right? Like that's where they both come into play. But it's important to understand that sensory-based meltdowns might just come out of nowhere, right? Like it just might pop off because, it's something that is triggered in them. But as a teacher, as a counselor, in that moment, we're not aware that maybe something we said was that trigger, right? And it's not our job, and we can't be in a place where we get offended by that. We didn't mean to do that right now, but now it's our job to support this student, get them the support, right? And if they are if they are escalating in the middle of class, get the other students out of there, get some extra support, get the counselor, get the administration and to better support that student so that you can, and then get the other kids out. So, hey, they don't need an audience, right? It's embarrassing for a lot of these kids who are experiencing sensory-based meltdowns to melt down in front of kids. And it's important that we don't let them feel embarrassed in front of their peers. It's important that we let them come down in a safe, quiet space. And then once everything's back to baseline, bring the students back in, get back to class, right? If as a group they need to talk about it, debrief it, that's, have your counselor come in. As a teacher, you are capable of debriefing with them, because you can be like, that was a very intense moment, friends, wasn't it? How can we support our friend to make sure that, they still feel loved in this classroom? Because that's also important, because they might feel, that student who had a sensory-based meltdown might be scared to come back into class, might feel nervous because they might feel like they scared people. And it's important that they still feel loved and supported in their classroom, not just by you as a teacher, but also by the peers themselves. All right, number 4.
Okay, so this one is especially important to me because, as school counselors, for example, like there's 3 full-time counselors at Springfield High School, and we have about 400 kids apiece that we have to take care of. So, we need a lot of help in supporting these kids. So this is something that teachers need to be really well versed in. And I think before we get into the total classroom tools, I just want to hop back to what Grant talked about a little bit with that invisible backpack. We know that these kids have it, but we also have it. And one of the greatest things you can do with yourself as an educator is being familiar with all of the stuff that's packed in your own backpack. So I have often been quoted as saying my trauma resume is what built my professional resume. So knowing what is considered a trauma, I think, is really important. Knowing the signs of what to look for, like Grant talked about with some of those meltdowns and things like that, and those behaviors, the language that they use, and this can happen at any age, the sensory-based and behavior-based meltdowns. This isn't just geared toward elementary kids. I've seen this anywhere up to 19-year-olds that I've worked with. But, thinking about some of these responses that you've had yourself, I think are really important. And again, you also have to know your own bias with some of these traumas. So I'll give you a personal example, and I am going to give you a trigger warning here. This might be kind of difficult to hear. But some of the things on my trauma resume, I know I mentioned the intense bullying, but some of the other things on my resume include physical assault, sexual assault, domestic violence, bullying by a boss or somebody in authority, natural disaster, you name it, I've kind of seen a little bit of it. So there are certain things that I know that I'm going to need another supportive adult to help me handle. Like my bias-y, I have a strong bias-y with sexual assault. So I am great with victims, but I'm not so great with dealing with the aggressors and helping them understand that. So that's where I would have to have another adult come in. So these are some of the things that you need to be aware of in your classroom too. What are you capable of handling? And what do you know you just can't do? And then who do you get involved in that moment? So kind of having not only an awareness of your invisible backpack, but an awareness of your trauma toolkit that you can use in the moment to protect yourself and your students.
And just add one more thing, and then I'll let you get back. It's okay to be like, I don't know what to do right now. It is perfectly okay to be like, I'm here for you. I'm here to listen. I'm going to get someone in here that can support you right now, because I just don't know how. Mm-hmm. And that's not you admitting defeat. I want to say that. That's not you saying I failed. That's just, we all have our points where we just don't know enough, and that's okay. And it's even more, and it really shows like that you truly care about this student by being like, I am here, I love you, and I'm here to support you, but I'm going to get someone who can support you even more.
Right.
All right.
So one of the biggest things that I want to talk about in the classroom is really using that positive reinforcement for behavior. And this is something that can be done at any age level. And I think that having students feel like they have a sense of control in their environment is huge for that. So one of the things I did as an educator that I found to be really successful, Grant and I shared our group norms in the beginning. Having your kids as a class in the beginning, doing those icebreakers, getting comfortable with each other, and then developing their own set of class norms that everybody can agree to. And then keeping them posted somewhere in the classroom so that there's a constant reminder of this is how we behave in here. This is our safe space, and this is what we want it to look like. And when you get this PowerPoint, you'll have access to some of these links too. So positive reinforcement, it's not just like rewarding with candy or a class party or anything like that. It's looking for things that you can reward in the moment. So maybe a kid that's raising their hand all of a sudden that hasn't really done it before, make sure you take the time to praise them. Thank you so much for participating. I really enjoyed your response in class. I think you shared something valuable today. Because they're going to be more likely to participate later on, right? And not that the candy and the classroom parties and things like that are a bad idea. They're absolutely a great idea. Anything that they have to work for, that they know if they continue responding in a positive way, is going to be great. Because as we know as educators, we're going to have a mixed bag of kids in our class that some are intrinsically motivated and some are extrinsically motivated. So another thing that helps with that developing classroom expectations and that positive reinforcement, do a survey to get to know your kids. I taught English, and one of my favorite assignments was having them do a personal narrative of things I want my teacher to know. And they would tell me about the things, some of the things that are in their invisible backpack. They would tell me about some of the good things in their lives or the things that they enjoy. Creating opportunities in your classroom for them to share about their hobbies or things that make them happy so that you have something that okay, I can add this to my toolkit to encourage positive behavior in the classroom. These are things we can talk about. These are things we can do. These are things I can incorporate in my lesson planning. And that's the biggest thing. When you're writing your lesson plans, how can you put in positive reinforcement right there within your curriculum? There's never a bad time to talk about how to behave. How do we become resilient? How do we respond to things? So I think that's something that should be incorporated all the way across the curriculum. There's ways to talk about that in science. There's ways to talk about that in English. There's ways to talk about that in PE. So try to get creative with that a little bit. And my favorite thing to talk about is the next bullet point here is using zero indifference policies versus zero tolerance. So I think this one might be a little bit hard to understand, so I'm going to try to break it down as much as possible. Because as educators, we want to stop the bad behavior. We want our students to feel safe. So if there are kids in class that are name calling or displaying bullying behaviors, we want to shut it down, right? And that's true. We do want to shut it down. We do want all of our kids to feel safe in that environment. However, studies are showing that zero tolerance long-term are actually having the opposite effect with the aggressors. They're not necessarily making them more functioning human beings. They're kind of harboring those negative reactions and those feelings when we are giving them a negative response to negative behavior. So zero tolerance is punishment-based and zero indifference is education-based. And again, there's this great chart here that's in this link that I will share with everybody, but I'm just going to talk about it briefly because I could go on forever about this. And I think that many of you will love this as well. And this goes back to using that positive reinforcement. So yes, you want to address it in the moment, but you want to make sure that you stay cool, calm, and collected. You don't want to be authoritarian in this moment. So you want to do education on the spot, right? You want to make sure that the class knows, hey, this is not part of our class norms. This is not what we agreed to. I understand that you're frustrated right now, but we're going to talk about this in a little bit. And then you want to make time to pull that student aside privately and have that moment of education there. Why was this child being aggressive in this moment? What was triggering this child? And how can we prevent it from happening in the future? Grant had even said, Maybe the kid is just hungry. It could be something as simple as that kid did not get breakfast that morning and they are hangry. So they're more likely to be irritable with another classmate because they did not get their physical needs met before they came to class. So that's something that's simple, right? That's something that we can easily fix when we talk to that kid and we figure it out. Okay, we want to make sure that you're up early enough in time in the morning that you get breakfast before you come to class. Or maybe that child doesn't have food at home. If that's the case, then you know you need to get more resources involved so that this family has access to a food pantry. I know that I regularly keep snacks and things in my office for kids that if they miss breakfast in the morning. And thankfully right now we are lucky enough that we received a grant that all of our kids can eat for free, which I think is fantastic. But knowing where you can get those resources from, is this something your school counselor has available? Is this something your school nurse has available? Is there a reserve of things like that in the cafeteria for kids like this? So that's kind of on like the lower end of where that comes, one of the easier ones to deal with. And then one of the more difficult ones to deal with is maybe this student just saw their mother being abused in their home that morning before they came to school. And this student maybe said a phrase or a saying that triggered the aggressor in this situation. I heard somebody talking about this to my mom, and now I'm sensitive and now I'm angry and I don't understand why. So again, pulling that student aside, tell me what happened before you felt the need to respond this way. And it's really about changing that language that Grant had said. So it's not, we don't talk that way. We don't do that. You're not going to behave that way. It's, I see you. I hear you. We have to change the way that we react to these situations. And I want to talk to you about this privately. I think it's a good idea to apologize because you may have hurt your friend's feelings. Staying cool, calm, and collected is the first thing, because the minute you become the authoritarian, the minute you now become the aggressor, the opportunity for teachable moments is gone. So with that, I think having those stress management strategies, this is the next one, allows for diffusion while dealing with the student in the process. So maybe that student, the aggressor, just needs a timeout. Hey, I think maybe you need to take a breather. And if you have a classroom aide, or if you know somebody that has a planning period or something like that, offer them, why don't you take a walk? You don't have to talk about anything now, but why don't you take a quick walk around the building, get a drink of water, see what that does. Having stress balls or fidgets or things like that in your classroom. Again, I think that these get thought of as something more for elementary age students, but they really do work great in every environment. That's something that works for me. I have a diagnosis of anxiety, and I'm somebody that's going to have to take medication for that the rest of my life, but medication only goes so far. So maybe you have students that are medicated, but they still need something else in that moment to stay calm. I love stress balls, keeping my hands busy, keeping myself moving. Those are all really important tools to know what to look for. And with that being said, recognizing the physical signs of stress and anxiety on a student in class, are the way that they're sitting, are they hunched over in their chair? Is their head down? Are their arms crossed? Is there a scowl on their face? Knowing from the beginning, okay, we're going to have to be gentle with this kid, I think is going to be really important. So that's something for you as a teacher, just in the moment when you're taking your attendance for the morning, do a physical check-in with these kids. What does their body language look like? Do they have dark circles under their eyes? Are they happy? Are they chatty? Can you tell which kids might be a distraction today? So just a little mental note of what this kid might be like that day before you even get started is going to help you not only with your instruction, but managing some of these reactions to stress and anxiety within your classroom. And also have a space in your classroom for stress management. Make this a regular part of your lesson planning. Have your main lesson plan. This is how I want things to go today, but have a plan B. All right, things aren't going as expected. What can I do instead? So for example, if you are doing, like I love doing Socratic seminar in my English classes. I loved having that discussion, those healthy debates and things like that. But sometimes kids are not in a place where they can have healthy debates. Sometimes they can't see another perspective other than their own. So I would have a backup assignment so that they could still get those content area things that we needed them to get, but I'm not triggering a stress response in them. Maybe this kid does not do well in discussion. So I have a backup assignment for them that they can work on independently in a space that's quiet. And that's totally on them. If they want to do that, that's their choice. So I think allowing choice in the classroom is going to be really helpful too. Because as we know, all kids are different. Their learning styles are different. Their response to stress is different. Their ACEs are different. And we're never going to know all of the adverse childhood traumas that these kids have experienced. We might always get a surface level of it, and there are going to be some kids where we know them like the back of our hand. But having a backup in what you can do in the classroom and who your support people are outside of the classroom, if you know you cannot handle it, are how you start dealing with trauma in your actual space so that students can feel safe when they come to your room.
And before we move, to our student teachers, we encourage you, like when we're talking about classroom rules, classroom norms, go talk to, if you go talk to your site teachers, do they have something in writing, like, or on the wall? Ask questions like, what are your norms in this classroom? What are the expectations in these classrooms? Does your school use PBIS? That's a lot of Springfield schools, all the elementary schools at least have, like, for me, we have the Hawk Way, right? So our core values are respectful, responsible, prepared, and safe. But classrooms, they work together to figure out what do each of those look like in the classrooms.
So we've pretty much gone over a lot of this already, but just as a little reminder, routine is huge for these kids. It helps them feel a sense of normalcy. It helps them know that when they're walking into that space, they feel safe, making sure that they have choices. They feel like they're in control. They have bodily autonomy. Increasing that level of support and encouragement. And like I said, that goes from just being willing to listen to knowing who your outside support people are that can get involved with this child. Set clear, firm limits for inappropriate behavior and develop logical consequences. That's the biggest part. Yes, you want to be firm. Do you want to be authoritarian? No, absolutely not. And I think allowing kids a choice in their own consequence is important too. Like even talking about my own kids, I have little kids, they're 5 and 3 right now, but if they do something they're not supposed to, I'll say, you made a poor choice. What do you think you should do now? And a lot of times my little one, I think I need a timeout. Like she will put herself in timeout, which I think is fantastic, but that's a practice that you have to get into. And again, going back to that base level check-in with attendance, view their body language, and just making sure that you have a backup in every situation. Always think when you're lesson planning, what could go wrong and what are my possible solutions of how I can fix it? You want to be proactive instead of reactive when dealing with that stress in your classroom. Okay, so secondary traumatic stress. Again, we all have our own invisible backpacks. You may have a score of 0 on that ACEs assessment, but then let's say that you deal with a situation that is potentially triggering for you with a student. So you have a kid that you have a really great relationship with, and now all of a sudden this kid isn't coming to class. Parents aren't responding. You're not really sure what's going on. And the kid comes back and says, my mom has stage 4 breast cancer. I'm really struggling with this. And then you're like, wow, I can't even imagine what that feels like. I have a great relationship with my mother. I can't imagine losing her, and constantly being that support system for that student. As educators, we're very empathetic. And a lot of times we can absorb that stress from our students, from our subjects, so to speak. And we carry that with us. So some of those symptoms that we can feel from compassion fatigue are increased anxiety and concern about our own safety. Like let's say that you have a child that is abused and you're the one that had to make the call to children's services. Some of the things that might creep into your head, oh my gosh, is this parent going to know it was me? Are they going to come after me? Are they going to try to find me? Are they going to try to take away my sense of security and safety? Feeling very negative about things. You know, I've worked and worked and worked with this kid and nothing is working. Having secondary thoughts about yourself, like maybe I'm not doing a great job. And that's going to make you tired. And when you're fatigued and when you're stressed, you can get some physical symptoms of this. So, for example, I have a diagnosis of Crohn's disease, and that it can be triggered by stress. And it's like ulcers in your stomach, it's migraines, it's chronic fatigue, and things like this. And I know when I'm dealing with a lot of high level cases with my students, I'm more likely to fall out of remission and have these physical side effects. Or you can even have the opposite, feeling numb and detached from your peers, from your students and things like that, wanting to keep yourself away from it and not being effective as an educator as a defense mechanism. Struggling to concentrate, difficulty with decision making. I know if I'm feeling that extreme fatigue, my concentration level is 0. It is really, really hard. Like that's when I need the constant reminders to keep myself on task. Wanting to physically or emotionally withdraw from others. Sometimes this can be okay. Sometimes we need our personal space and we just need a place to just be in quiet and be alone with our thoughts and just decompress. But if we do that too much, it can have the opposite effect. It's no longer a therapeutic effect. It's no longer an opportunity for us to feel rejuvenated. It makes us feel isolated, and those feelings of personal inadequacy or depression will increase. So if you don't manage these things, it's going to worsen your health. Like I said, if I'm not taking care of myself, I know I'm more likely to experience a flare with my Crohn's disease. So some of the coping strategies that you can use for this are your own self-awareness. Recognize the signs and symptoms. If you are feeling this way, take a step back. What could be causing this? And what can I do about it? Making self-care a priority. And I think that this is something that really needs to be explored a little bit more, because I think that there is a false sense of what self-care is. You know, it's not necessarily taking a bubble bath or eating chocolate or getting your nails done or, you know, getting a massage. Yes, all of those things are great and they can make us feel good in the moment, but that's not going to have long-term effects on your overall health. You want something for self-care that doesn't just create instant gratification. So self-care are things like making sure you're getting enough sleep, drinking enough water, clean something. You know, we all function better when we're in clean, organized spaces. Clutter can increase that anxiety. Making sure that you're eating healthy. So really taking a step to reflect, because self-care isn't always easy. Sometimes it's doing the things we don't want to do, but we know that they're good for us. Maintaining your social connections. This is huge, especially for my introverts, or people like me, where you're an extroverted introvert. Like I really enjoy my alone time. But I talk a lot. I may seem overly positive, and sometimes that's a defense mechanism too, to try to hide from some of those things that are causing you stress and anxiety. So making sure you have at least one person, whether it's a family member, it's a friend, it's a colleague, even if it's your therapist, that you can maintain that social connection to talk about some of these things that you're dealing with. We did something called Challenge Day at our school, and it's a social emotional workshop for kids. And one of my favorite analogies that they use that I think is really relevant for adults as well is we all have this emotional balloon inside of us. So every time something happens, this balloon blows up, you know, so every time something bad happens, oh, my car didn't start this morning, or, you know, I really needed something from the grocery store and it was out, like something simple, you know, and then these bigger things keep happening and we're not talking about them. We're not letting any of that air out of that balloon. What's going to happen if that balloon keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger? It's going to pop, right? It's going to explode. So having those social connections and those support groups and using individual counseling, I think are really important, so that you're constantly letting that air out of that emotional balloon and you're not carrying all of that around in your emotional backpack all of the time.
Hey, Kelsey.
Yeah.
It is now 10:29.
Oh,
so
sorry. Okay.
no,
Sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. So we're going to skip the reflection. Basically, what we hope is that, you know, what we were going to do is have everybody share what they were going to take from this to kind of incorporate into their lessons, their classroom. So obviously we don't have time for that, but hopefully you got something hopefully we buried something in your brain today about that. Put a little brainworm in there about, using, trauma prevention in your classroom. Now, if I know it's 10:30 now, you can, I know now's the break time technically for the next one, but if you have questions, we will stay on for any questions.
And I also did put the link to this presentation as a PDF in the chat box for everybody to have and download with some of those resources, those links and things that we said that we found really valuable.
I want to thank our presenters for the session this morning, giving us a lot of valuable tools to help us with our students and even with colleagues. So thank you so much. What I want to remind you of is that you can stay on this Zoom link if you are planning to see the Building Effective Relationships with Parents and Guardians with Kimberly Christensen from Bowling Green State University. That is going to be this link at 10:45. If not, you are more than welcome to stay on and ask some questions or go to your next Zoom room. Thank you again.
Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate everybody today and all the positive comments in the chat box. That means a lot to us. Thank you.
Yes, for how stressed I was before this. It was great. Thank you.
Yeah, a lot of positives. Did a wonderful job.
Thank you, Taryn.
Thank you.
Yep.
I was very excited to see you on as a moderator today.
I'm glad to be here.
I know, well, because I don't get to see you as much right now,
And isn't she like one of the nicest people you've ever met too?
Yes.
You're so kind. Right back at both of you. Do you have a question, Jesse? Oh.
I'm reviewing my notes before I leave. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Do you need anything clarified?
I was just going to ask for, in general, so I'm a current teacher. I'm old in the group. That's okay. But I was going to ask for advice on, I guess, so I'll just say we have 50-minute classes and then 5 minutes in between, and plus we're hybrid, so I'm barely seeing my little cherubs as often as I would like to these days. But I do sense some of these things that you're talking about, especially the physical triggers for students and things like that. I guess, do you have recommendations on a timely and appropriate way to find a way to address these students to get them the help that they need, whether it's through me or through our school psych or school counselors? But I hate to just be like, hey, you seem like something's wrong, go down to the office. That doesn't feel right. But I guess especially in the environment we're in right now, do you have recommendations on how to say, I can tell that you're struggling and I want to support you, and what's going on? Or maybe that's not even the right question to ask. I don't know.
I mean, so with elementary kids, I always find it good to you say you want to target one or two kids, right? But it never hurts to incorporate something for the entire class. So are you familiar with zones of regulation at all?
It doesn't sound familiar right now.
So that is so zones of regulation is all about helping kids identify where their emotions lie within 4 color coordinates. So are they in the blue zone, green zone, yellow zone, red zone? And then once they can start doing that, now they can start identifying what their triggers are, and then developing classroom calming techniques, coping skills, toolboxes to help them. So blue zone is the sad, low energy, bored. Green's good to go, ready to learn. Yellow is you're excited, you're silly, you're frustrated, you're confused. Red zone is angry, aggressive. So what kind of things then do you trigger you to put you out of the green zone, and then what kind of tools can you use to bring yourself back into it? Now that would be a more whole classroom approach, but for young kids, I have kids, I've seen teachers where they just send kids out, if you're seeing a kid struggling, you're starting to see these physical symptoms happening, it never hurts to just immediately be hey, can I, let's all shift focus real fast, to do some quiet work, maybe do like a worksheet, like, crossword, something fun, but something that'll keep their focus, right? And then, it never hurts to just go talk to the student in the hallway, be like, hey, I'm noticing this. Is everything okay? And if you don't feel comfortable talking to me, is there someone you do feel comfortable talking to?
That's exactly what I was going to say, Grant. I think, and that's where I was going back to having those backup plans within your lesson plans. When you're preparing for your day, go into it expecting that somebody is going to have these behaviors. It's great if they don't. We love it when that doesn't happen, but then at least you're not scrambling in the minute. But that's exactly right. Just pulling them out and having that one-on-one conversation, keeping mental notes of what they're saying to you, and make a referral to the school counselor.
And they may not want to open up to you, but now they know that you are someone that they can go to. So
Right.
They may not want to say something at that moment, but you'd be shocked. You'd be very surprised that maybe like an hour or two later, they might come up to you, be like, hey, this is what's happening, right? Or they might give you a note, but like just the fact that you took a moment to individually approach them and ask them what's wrong shows that there's an adult in that building that cares for them.
Mm-hmm. Great question, though.
Yeah, awesome.
Thank you. It's so helpful to hear. I mean, I put this in the chat too, but it's so helpful to hear effective communication, between teacher and student. And it's like, I see, well, we're hybrid now, but in a normal day, I would see 160 students in one day. And like you said earlier, Kelsey, taking on some of that stress and anxiety, and it's like, oh, I see you and I want to help you, but I don't know how, and then they leave my room, and
Right.
and so it's like I'm really working. This is now my 5th year of teaching, so I'm really starting to shift my focus more on not so much of a focus of standards, content, curriculum. I feel like that part's kind of old news now, and now I'm like, how can I be a more compassionate and emotionally aware teacher to be supportive for my kiddos? So this was really helpful today. Thank you.
Well, and I think the biggest thing to remember too is with like those contents and standards, when kids feel good in your room, those things are going to come naturally to them. When they feel safe, when they feel protected, when they feel cared about. Just thinking back in my own personal teaching career, I had some classes that were really, really difficult, right? They did not want to connect. They didn't like each other, and those were my classes that naturally they were going to struggle on those standardized tests. But the ones where we really harnessed in on those norms and that group connection, they did great. So the more that you build that environment and you focus on that social emotional learning, the better your testing and things like that are going to turn out.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, all good things today. Thank you, you guys.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, both of you. Wonderful job. I mean, I've had a lot of presentations and workshops on this subject area, but I learned so many great tools just for myself, and self-reflecting back as a classroom teacher on some of those instances of how you use the calming strategy, and the language is so powerful. And just, I applaud you both. Great job. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I know. I wish I knew all of this in my first years in education. When I'm 22 years old and teaching 18-year-olds, that would have been a lot more helpful.
It never works for anybody to get into a power struggle.
No.
Yeah.
Well,
No.
And these kids looked at me like, you look like the same age as me. I don't have to listen to you. And I'm like, oh gosh.
And you're like, you're right. You're right.
I know. I could have been your babysitter.
Wah, wah.
Well,
Awesome.
enjoy your day. And if you're staying on, I'm excited for the next presentation about family, building effective relationships with families.